welcome. The topic of my talk is Humans Against AI. This is a well-trodden path, this topic is. A lot of talks, a lot of speeches, a lot of reports on the topic available around. I would like to join in with the cognition philosophers and Daniel Dennett, one of the major experts in artificial intelligence and the cognition philosophy at the moment. His answers to these questions that we are framing for ourselves, what's in store for us in our relations with AI. I'm quite happy with his answers, so I'm virtually standing together with him in conducting this talk. Now, his thesis I'm going to append with the neurophysiological apparatus, and I will try to explain why his notions actually are in line with our current understanding of the brain, psychology, and consciousness. First off, I would like to give the floor to Daniel Dennett himself. I have been proving many years that, yes, it is essentially possible to reproduce human consciousness in the machine. At the end of the day, we are the machine. We are the robots, made out of robots, made out of robots. We are incredibly complex. We are trillions of moving parts, and yet all of these parts are robotized. There's no miracle in it. In other words, Dennett is saying that our consciousness can be transferred into an artificial carrier. In other words, we can reproduce our psychic activity in a technical device, in a machine. The other thing is just how is that possible, and how much is that realistic? The other day, a group of researchers published a graph of connectome in the Nature magazine. A nematoda, Kurpatov elegans. This is a hermaphrodite, and the male species has about 1,000 cells and about 579 nodes. So this is a highly primitive creature, and this is sort of an automaton in the sense that we are used to thinking about it. But then, as we move along, there's quite a few problems. You can't really transpose this logic to the human brain. Not even, you can't really transpose this to the brain of a fruit fly. And even in 2020, what the Google did with trying to recreate a connectome of a fruit fly with a number of neurons exceeding 25,000, you can see the schematics of these neurons. Actually, the brain is the size of a poppy seed, and then this poppy seed is dissected into a great number of subsystems, each of which is responsible for its own functionality in the psychic life of the fly. And these systems of interactions between the neurons in every one of those circuits. Now, the way the synthesis works, when you superimpose one net over another and get a brain, we can't really tell how that happens. In other words, we're getting beautiful pictures that are not really as functional as we would like them to be. The technology itself of reproducing the connectome, and you know that was a powerful trend in its own day. We now appreciate that this area holds less and less promise as a research area, but I mean, first and foremost, this is a complicated technology that needs to get an interminable number of category views of one of the same brain, and then with a certain margin of error, you reproduce the connections between the neurons. But in an actual brain, there's 87 billion of cells in a human mind, and about a third ensure the motions. Every neuron has about 10,000 synapses on average, and these synapses actually create the environment of action for every neuron. The linkages between the neurons of every brain are specific. So my brain is different from your brain. They are fundamentally different, those brains are, and even the brains of the flies are different. And you need to appreciate that our brains continuously develop new neurons, and they ensure the new remembrances. If that does not happen, we will not be able to remember reality. Say the cells of hippocampus stop reproducing, you can't remember relevant events. That said, all the linkages, whenever a new skill appears, whenever a new tie appears, those ties are fundamentally different. But this is not the only problem. The next problem, if we resolve the connectome puzzle, which, as I have shown, that does not really resolve the objective of transferring consciousness, we transition to the problem of a difficult consciousness problem. That was defined by Chalmers as the inability to understand our subjective experience, the inability to transfer qual. We all sense certain emotions, we all have a picture of the world, we somehow perceive it, but then every one of us does that individually, uniquely, and there's no guarantee that you will not see red where I see green and vice versa. Yes, we do have our own emotions, and they are not conditioned directly by the neuron connections. They are predicate on the biochemistry, a huge number of chemical substances that define the quality of these emotions. There are obviously substances that define the agitation and deceleration processes of neurons that could have been programmed, but then you then you migrate into the things that are related to various emotions, you know, feeling of satisfaction, feeling of joy, all those positive and negative reinforcements. All of that is defined by the quality of the neuromediators, all those amino acids. And you need to understand that you can't really reproduce that chemistry, especially since all those neuromediators were formed evolutionary in the course of evolution, and they were formed differently in the various systems. It just happened that in the same brain, the same mediators can have different functions, fundamentally different functions, depending on which area of the brain they function in, you know, and with what specific receptors they are connected with. You know, the same dopamine that has several types of receptors that give out completely different reactions. The next problem is related to the connectome, and it is related to the neuromediators. The density of contact between specific neurons is different. It is different because of our experience in life, but it is different in the volume of influence of one synapse on the cell, of the thousands that touch this cell. And this difference is defined by the number of these spikes. Eric Kandel got a Nobel Prize for this research in his time that showed how the mechanisms of memory get formed. They get formed through the increased density and the space over which neurons touch each other. But how do these influence the volume of neuromediators transferred? We can't really tell. And this really hampers our ability to define why a given neuron is actually responding to a certain impulse.
Yes, we know that, you know, how does the neural net cell respond. It's a polarized membrane, then it gets a lot of pulses from another neurons. There is a polarization, and the cell makes a decision by its own manner how it will, in terms of how it will respond, in terms of the how to act from all this chaos, within all this chaos, and of the impact of other neurons surrounding it. But why this specific cell has responded and reacted, we do not know that. At the same time, we know that by creating the same circumstances of impacting or affecting the neuron, it might get charged or might get discharged. So each neuron is its own artificial intelligence with its own life, with its own decisions that it makes. That doesn't mean that it is something that we cannot really grasp, but it is too far for our research. Given the difference of the receptors that are located on the cell, and given the difference of these spaces, of the surfaces, the differences of the neuromediator environment that influences the function of the neuron, and when David says that it is a robot robot made from robots. This robot is a total enigma for us because although it is a part of our living brain. So is it possible to migrate the individual consciousness to the technical platform? So there are many promises. And yes, it is theoretically possible, but it is for sure not going to happen soon. And the second question, is it therefore right to call AI artificial intelligence? My take on that is that the difference in terms of how we create intellectual machines and how the nature created our intelligence is a barrier that we cannot address. That is a machine intelligence, not a artificial intelligence, and actually this is a totally different instance. And then it actually says that we have to do that. We have to make this difference. So the next quote of Dennett, like to kind of ask him to participate in our discussion. While we live, we will see only smart tools, not friends. So do not think about them as friends. Do not try to make friends of them. And moreover, do not fool yourself and think that you are a so-called friend for them. Dennett is making sure we understand that we do not make humans humanize machines. We have this biological need to humanize things. Plato created his theory of eidos, and he was the first to understand the humanization. There are some ideal things in the sky, like an ideal chair, for instance, but in the reality we have a lot of variations of this ideal chair, and the material things that we face in our day-to-day world is a reflection of some fundamental instance, some fundamental essence. It is a very religious aspect, so to speak, yet it is a very good psychological aspect. Our psyche is peculiar in the fact that we reproduce another world, another living world of another person. A kid that cannot distinguish between living creatures and non-living creatures might humanize a teddy bear or a doll and think that it is a living creature, that it feels pain and sadness and so on and so forth. We humanize animals, especially when we're kids, like we think that dogs are our friends, or even we might put soul in this device like Tamagotchi. We can see the soul there and kind of make it a living creature. And of course there are more and more machines that are increasingly more like humans. Now we see this kind of a migration from essentialism, which Plato says is a vision of reality. This is the essence, essentia, the essence of that we see in the objects. You know, chairness in the chair, and tableness in the table, and humanness in human nature in human. We move to anthropomorphism. Hamlin, Wynne, and Bloom made a very interesting research. They showed a 6-month or 1-year-old kid, toddler. They made a cartoon. So there were these figures, red, yellow, and blue, that were moving. The idea of this experiment was the following. They tried to understand how can a kid how can a toddler understand the relationship between different people when the abstract figures are used. And they found out that it is okay to do the following. The yellow triangle will help the red round to go to upstairs, and the blue square would hinder the red circles, to make sure that the toddler has different psychological relations with the figures, and the toddlers select the yellow triangles. These toddlers cannot walk, cannot talk, yet they have this anthropomorphic essences. They put it in these abstract figures. Now, what do we have to understand to sum up this section of the presentation, apart from the fundamental things that are related to the integration of the essence within objects that we see? I mean, we put it in the reality. It's not that it is there. The difference between us and the machine in terms of the psyche is that it's all our memories that we think are real are actually wrong. We know it thanks to Lofter's research. So we create our memories ad hoc, depending on different situations. We will be reminded of a situation differently. Machines have absolute memory, of course. We have a rational interpreter. We know that because we have a research that we are rational. We interpret the events and we adapt them to our current perception of the situation. Here, the machine uses strict logical sequences. We have a phantom of our personality that starts to form within us since the age of 3, when we actually start telling stories about ourselves. What is based on our conflict and on our difficult relations with other people. Machines do not have this subjective eye. The emotional reactions in the biological needs, this is the essence of our living. It dictates the modality of our perceptions. With the machine, the decisions go along with the facts and not these settings. Now, when we make a decision, we use the future based on the needs. And time is a psychological category. This future is not a result. This is a time that was unfolded within my head, and obviously the machine makes a decision based on the current situation. These are the differences that help us to understand that the mechanisms that human psyche works and the machine brain works are different in principle. As I have mentioned on the last conference, when I talked about racist programming, I said that we have several principles that would help us to mathematize the way our brain works with the information. Our research showed that thanks to the category theory, we might mathematize the principle of generation of difficulty that is done within the brain, and the principle of generation, the principle of relations when we define the values of the pattern through comparing it with the experience, the principle of approximation that ensures that we are able to see the essence given the right amount of attributes, and the principle of simultaneously on the different levels and different systems of the brain, the information is being processed and it is done in parallel and in line with the process. Talking about the aggregation of data, and the principle of heaviness. We're talking about the number of elements as part of the task. But these are the mathematical principles of working with the information. It's not something that we could have named the real principles of the human intelligence. These are the universal principles of processing information that can be programmed. That's true. So is there a risk that we would give a human soul, so to speak, to the smart machines? Well, you understand perfectly well. It's happening right now. Regularly what we do is we give this human essence to the machine. Obviously, they don't have that. But this is our biological mechanism. Will the machines, on the current level of knowledge and technologies, at least, be able to the true essentialism, to the same mechanism? You know, for instance, if we think that all the other things can be replicated by us, we'll be able to replicate this possibility to create, to give some instances to the external information. No, that's not true. We understand that perfectly well, because this is a totally biological construct, and You can do it as part of the machine learning, but as it grows, like a kid who is growing in some environment, I mean, there will be some other problems. I'm going to talk about that later. Now, then again, people were not did not really grasp the fact that it's not only the personal life that should not be touched, but the institutes should not be touched. Everyone should think about how to save the institute and to forego everything and to be concerned, like how to save this membrane. He says that this environment we are going into right now might destroy in a way, destroy the society. I will use the formula that was developed by Pierre Bourdieu. He's a social expert and a philosopher. Habitus is a set of practices that we learn from each other and we transfer them based on our cultural and social environment. These habitus actually determine our behavior, based on the situation, the character of of the way we think. Now, these are the two great Russian writers, Lev Tolstoy and Alexei Gorky. They actually talk about the institutes that were formed a little bit more than 100 years ago within the people. In their books about the childhood, about the youth, they say about this habitus, about this methods of perception and reality. Then, on this scientific and philosophical level, we had Michel Foucault, Supervise and Punish. That was the name of his work, and Foucault showed how the disciplinary society is determined by the mechanism of the social pressure that is being put on an individual person. Largely speaking, the society, as part of its constant punishment, and the punishment is not just some putting someone to jail, but the lack of the happiness that the people we like, the people near to us or not near to us, feel when we behave in a certain way. So it might lead to some psychological pain and the concerns and the anxiety, and that would in the end lead to the fact that we might get this behavioral stereotypes. Now, in this new reality of the digital civilization, this disciplinary society is losing its pertinence. Then there is a loss of privacy. There's accessibility to our personal data. You can now design and project our behavior using the technologies. There are different ways to model our behavior using the journalists and many other things. The algorithms of the social media that determine what will be put in this internal world. And it's determined by the selection, not by the structure of the society. That gives some imperatives. And the recommender services work within the same logic. At the same time, we understand that there is a deinstitutionalization of the traditions and moral rules. We know about that very well due to cyberbullying and the other similar phenomenon. The education and the authority does not work in the same manner because this vertical is being lost, where there is an up and down parts of the society. The state and the law are changing. Currently, the crimes, the infringement of rights, you don't quite understand when your rights are being infringed, because our data are being used by a huge number of companies and research centers. Is this an infringement of my rights to my privacy rights related to my personal data? It is a violation, but we don't see it as such. And the civil organizations that basically form the society. Can we save the previous institutes in the digital society? No, because they were based on privacy, local character, and violence. That was always a specific feature of our society. Do we know how this society work without these habitus? No. The problem is so large scale that it cannot really be. People do not want to problematize that, so we don't understand neither the morale nor the ethic. And the fourth, then it's quote, what is the problem to give the routine thinking work to such a high-tech things like AI? No problem here if we won't be able to have our own cognitive skills removed and being made redundant, because we have this cognitive prosthesis using it increasingly more often, and we risk to become not to become self-reliable. We might be rendered helpless, and I have talked about that. There is a risk, how the digital information dependability impacts people. Digital dementia of the kids. This hyperactivity problem is a pandemic, really, for the related to children's behavior. Now, the second thing is information suitability of the adults. They cannot understand some things because their brain is connected all the time, and it is connected from one thing to another thing very quickly and all the time. And the digital autism, this is something that makes us look like humans more and more. And if a human brain can integrate some instances like toys and animals and people and so on and so forth, the modern person with digital autism has a less and less ability to replay the way people look at the world, other people look at the world, so they think people are machines. So they lose the social material. So what do we have in the result? The intellectual function is the derivative of the social practice. This is something that we know. It has been proved thanks to our research of the brain. The social practice is becoming less and less relevant, and it is being changed, and this is why it is not serving our intellectual function. We have this intellectual function that is being formed when we are becoming adults during the environment and the physical things that we respond to. Something is that makes the bulk of that. Now, 2/3 of neurons are responsible for our moving function in this or that manner. So it's a very important feature as we discover the world. Now the people are looking at tablet PCs, at laptops. They do not move, so people moved outside of their natural environment to discover the world. So this mechanism is not working, and then the work of our intellectual function is determined by the extent to which we use it in a diversely and actively. Because right now, smart machines makes a lot of intellectual operations redundant that were needed by our brain to support it, to keep the fitness of our brain, to make sure that it uses it is multifunctional and healthy. And these machines, including AI, leads to the fact that the conditions needed to form a proper intelligence are being destroyed. Now, everything that we think is ramifications of the communication between the people and the digital environment, and this new machine intelligence is something that is described by me in my book, The Fourth World War. It is actually about the way our brain will change, our psyche will change in the new digital environment.
Now, what are we observing right now? The formation of all kinds of new boundaries, a new recarving of the world. That's what we are observing. There are new boundaries between the United States and Mexico is emerging, new boundaries between the European Union and refugee sending countries are emerging, new quarantine boundaries are emerging, and the further we go, the more boundaries we're going to get between transnational corporations like Google, Amazon, and so forth. Right now, we are getting into the new cold genre of war. The data are going to be closed. Access to data is going to be closed, and the new formation of power centers, new civilization centers, is going to be happening. And this new cover-up of society, public services and businesses, this new carve-up that is necessary is explained by the going out of action for those old mechanisms of government ethics and operations. And because the fabric of society is disintegrating, these systems are trying to reintegrate. The government structures, the business entities, they are trying to reintegrate, to somehow put together a new rationale for their activities in this brave new world. Now, in summation of all this, this Fourth World War is going to unravel if we put soul into the artificial intelligence and stop understanding just how radically our brain is different from artificial intelligence and from the smart machines that we are developing ourselves, until we recognize their completely different entity. And unless we learn to interact with them at a completely different field, we don't have to socialize them. We don't need to treat them equal to ourselves. I think this is the most important decision that we all must make for ourselves. Thank you very much for attention. Hopefully you found interest